Good morning and welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. It is Thursday, August 18th, 2022. Earlier this month, outrage ensued over a listing on Airbnb that was sparked by not a Twitter post, but a TikTok post that essentially capitalized on Black trauma. Listings of a quote-unquote charming Mississippi cottage with old-fashioned decor and access to Wi-Fi and streaming platforms, and those with similar descriptions in Louisiana, Georgia, and other locations had similar descriptions. The now removed listings were slave quarters. It has been about 157 years since Congress has abolished slavery. But since that time, only 5 generations of African Americans have been born free. 40% of all slaves ever brought to America came through Charleston, South Carolina. The homes they were sold into, where they were forced to work until death, are now tourist attractions branded on these so-called picturesque allure. It is also revealing that it's a sad American truth that nothing is untouched by the legacy of slavery, even centuries on. Joseph McGill, the founder of the Slave Dwelling Project, has complained that the commercialization of plantation sites has been happening for decades, and he will join us this morning to talk about it. But first, a couple of headlines to start your morning with Oshia Boyd. Oshia, good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see you as always. Oshia, we start off with 2 Pennsylvania judges who orchestrated a scheme to send children to for-profit jails in exchange for kickbacks were ordered to pay more than $200 million to the victims of children who fell victims to their crimes. U.S. District Judge Christopher Connor awarded $106 million in compensatory damages and $100 million in punitive damages to nearly 300 plaintiffs in a long-running civil suit against the judges in what became known as the Kids for Cash scandal. Mark Civarella and another judge, Michael Conahan, shut down a county-run juvenile detention center and accepted $2.8 million in illegal payments from the builder and co-owner of the 2 for-profit jails. And Oshia, the thing with this was that these were kids as young as 8 years old, no prior record. They were just, some kids was just through tantrums in school, and these 2 judges made sure that they went to jail. And so of the victims, several of them now have committed suicide or died by drug overdose. It's the aftermath of them being sent to jail at such young ages. Oshia, these 2 judges, one of them was let out of prison just a couple of years ago because of the pandemic, and the other one is still serving his more than 30-year sentence. But, I mean, what do you say about judges like this?
Okay, what do I say? What do I say that I can say on the air that is that is respectful? And this is just flabbergasting. This is not like it's the first time we've ever heard of this. It seems to be pretty common that we're arresting 8-year-olds all the time now. This happens quite a lot. I read a ProPublica article a few months back about the similar situation where judges were sentencing 8-year-old kids and locking them up and putting them in juvenile. What is an 8-year-old doing? What is any child doing that you have to? This is just a lot. This is a lot. I mean,
a
when
lot.
you think about,
It's so funny though.
families.
Yeah, well, and it's so interesting because I remember when this was happening. It was in Luzerne County in Pennsylvania, and I just remember these judges when they were finally arrested and let out in handcuffs. For the community. It was just seeing them let out in handcuffs was a victory in itself, and then the long prison sentences. And I would imagine, as Barrington Salmon joins us, that these judges, in the case of Judge Conahan, who was released because of COVID just 2 years ago, who still had, I believe it was 8 or 9 years left on his sentence, and then Civarella, who was really the mastermind behind it. You just think about that for a second, Barrington. Judges, taking money to send kids to jail, and most of those kids, or many of those kids anyway, never recovered.
No.
And Barrington, you're on mute.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, I just every time I think about it, it just makes me think about what I always say: burn down the whole thing. It is so exploitative.
Mm-hmm.
It is focused so much on the most vulnerable, the poor,
Mm-hmm.
black and brown people, and even in cases like this, that judge should never get out of jail,
Yeah.
regardless of COVID, because
Yeah.
the damage to the children that these guys have done, they should never get out of jail.
Well, and you know, they have far-reaching effects too, because after they uncovered this scheme, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court had to throw out over 4,000 juvenile convictions between 2003 and 2008. Far-ranging implications for their actions. These judges had yachts in Florida, homes. They had homes overseas. They were really raking in the dough, if you will, on just sending kids to jail, really for no reason. And of course, as you said, the most vulnerable. I just remember the story well, because these were the most vulnerable, right? The parents didn't know their rights, the kids didn't know their rights, and they had nobody to tell them, except in some cases a court-appointed attorney who just really went along with the program.
Wow. There's so much to unpack here. There's like so much system exploiting, slave labor, slavery. I mean, these who are these people? Like, how can you be so cruel and callous um that you just see these kids as an opportunity for you to make money and for you to get rich? And then I know these judges have people in their family who or friends, and they'll, oh, these are great upstanding guys, these are great upstanding citizens. They,
Mm.
I people, wow, it just blows me away that we still live in a time where these things happen.
Yeah.
And this whole idea of protecting children, we want to ban books. We want to get CRT out of classrooms. We want, you know, to protect children. We want women to have babies to protect children. This is what happens to these children. We are not protecting children at all in this country.
No.
Children are not cared for. They are not thought about. We have hungry children. We have children going to prison. They're damaged. They're damaged now. They need
Damage, totally.
years and years of therapy.
And this judgment really confirms or reaffirms, I should say, not confirm, but reaffirm how damaged these kids, the families, and even the community is because of the actions of these heartless and greedy judges. Barrington, the National Basketball Association has announced that they will be off on election day. The league schedule for the coming season will have all 30 teams playing on November 7th, the night before the midterm elections. The NBA is hoping teams use that night as an opportunity to encourage fans to get out and vote, plus amplify the need for civic engagement. But on November 8th, which is election day, no NBA team will have a game scheduled for that night. Teams are being encouraged by the league to share election information such as registration deadlines with their fan bases in the weeks leading up to November 8th. So this decision came down, according to the NBA, because it was out of the NBA's quote unquote families focus on promoting nonpartisan civic engagement. There's been a long cry for election day to be a holiday. And I seem to recall, and Barrington, you and I grew up around the same time, that our schools were polling sites and we didn't go to school on election day, right?
Yeah, that's true. And it's interesting. Um, these these people always talking about American exceptionalism and American democracy, but it's garbage because you go to Europe, you go to other countries around the world, voting day is a day off so that people can go and perform their civic duty. I mean, and if you look at what's going on now, there's lots of folks who would like to vote, but they got to go to work or there are other responsibilities that they have to take care of that prevents them from doing that. So I applaud the NBA, and I hope a whole lot more people do that. But we're looking at it. We're living in a time where every aspect of this so-called democracy is under threat, particularly in the electoral process, as they continue to move to deny anyone who looks like us the ability to vote, to ensure that the white minority is in control for in perpetuity.
Mhm.
Well, Oshia, the NBA is trying to lead the way here, and perhaps it's a hint to other organizations, other not just sports leagues, but other businesses.
I mean, geez, it's 2022. They just thought of this. I didn't even realize this was an issue. I mean, I didn't realize this was an issue that players couldn't vote because, I mean, it makes sense. They're on the road.
Well, it's
But
not saying they couldn't vote.
well, I mean, it
They're
was
just giving them
difficult.
that
It was
day off.
difficult. Yeah,
Yeah,
it made it more challenging.
yeah.
And then, in some places where absentee voting has become such a challenge, it just seemed like a no-brainer to me that organizations, businesses would actually help people to vote. And and we're seeing that that's become a problem. People don't want you to vote because they don't want to not be in power. I'm just a little, like I said, I'm just a little taken aback that this is just now becoming a thing. But I think anything that we can do to help educate people on voting, anything we can do to get people out to vote, because as Barrington said, our American exceptionalism, people say that because they haven't been anyplace else. They don't know. They don't know. They've never traveled to any other country, and they don't see how other countries handle voting. It shouldn't be this difficult to vote. It really shouldn't. And we should have a much greater turnout than we do. But there's so much suppression that happens, so many things that make it difficult. If you're working, I mean, and we've changed our polling here in Indianapolis. And when I was in school, we had voting in our school, but we actually we still came to school. It was like in a closed off section from us, but it was a thing that you saw people coming to vote and exercising their civic duty, and people just don't feel the same about it anymore for various reasons.
Well, politics are so different today than they've ever been before. It's amazing what we see with politicians today. But now we turn our attention to slave tourism, and what many say is just further proof of how the history of slavery in this country is constantly denied and now being mocked. Joining us is Joseph McGill Jr. of the Slave Dwelling Project. Good morning, Joseph McGill Jr.
Good morning to you.
Good to have you. First, tell us a little bit about the Slave Dwelling Project and why and when did you start this?
Yeah, it gets a little difficult to tell just a little bit, but I'll give it a try. Slave Dwelling Project. I've been doing this for 12 years. This idea of finding slave dwellings wherever they are in these United States and spending nights in these spaces, and without the luxuries, sleeping bag, pillow, padding, sleeping bag, pillow. And I've been doing this for the last 12 years and gaining access to these places to bring attention to the fact that they exist. And they've always existed, but in a state where they could be a part of the background. These nice, beautiful homes that people would come to pay to visit. They were only learning about the enslavers, not the people whose labor was stolen, not the people who made all of what they were marveling over possible. So with that anger, I came up with this idea of finding these places wherever they are, spending nights in them, and bringing attention to the fact that they are there. And because they are there, they could be interpreted for what they really are and what they really were historically. So 12 years later, I'm still at it.
Okay, so let's tackle this for a moment. The listings that sparked an outrage earlier this month. One individual who stayed at the Panther Burn Cottage last October, according to the Airbnb site, left a positive review about the former slave cabin on the listing, writing that the location made them feel like they, quote unquote, were stepping back into history as to glorify the history of slavery. How much does this show about America's willful ignorance of Black history?
Yeah. Willful ignorance of American history, which has excluded the stories of people who are other than the white race, glorified white men. Uh, the history now that's being that counters that is we're getting pushback, and we're getting pushback at the early age of our youth in this thing called anti-CRT, and that involves the fact that what the slave dwelling project is about in this anti-CRT, they don't want the youth to hear about this or learn about these things. Uh, but on top of all that is the implicit bias that makes someone think that renting these places out as a luxurious place to come and experience, that is the total extreme in the wrong direction. I think we should be more focused on using these places to educate people for the true history of what occurred at these sites. But the sites have to be there for that to happen. But here's the other side of that.
Yeah.
These are private properties, and people can do with these properties what they like. And I say that to say this: there was a case in Missouri where a new owner, white owner, purchased a property and contemplating what to do with it. The historians, the preservationists were all in her ear saying, you got to do it. If you want to preserve this building, you got to do this, you got to do, you can't do that. So in all this frustration, she tore it down. She didn't even be bothered with it. So, that's my point, that the buildings need to exist.
Yeah, let me just say too that as I throw it to you, Barrington, Airbnb has taken these all types of ads like this down or listings down, and they have apologized for them. But we see, Barrington, that there are so many things here. There's those listings that people are offering these up for rentals, vacations, and things of that nature. And now we have the slave dwelling project, in which Joseph McGill is trying to bring some more understanding of what has happened and what goes on in the history of African Americans in that slave trade. Barrington, I'm gonna throw it to you.
I would like to applaud Mr. McGill for what he's doing. Thank you, sir, for your work. Stacy, all of this is connected. The erasure of our history, the erasure of our contributions to this country, the anti-CRT thing. One of the things that really is stunning to me is how stupid these Trump supporters are. These right-wing people, and when I say stupid, I mean ignorant. They eschew facts. They embrace lies. They do everything that they can to ensure that they're comfortable at our expense. And for Airbnb to have to be shamed into apologizing, forget your apology. Who wants your apology? Because they show us every day what they are. And I guess one of the things that we're seeing is this attempt by Trumpists, right-wing, far-right people to take this country back to a time when they thought or they knew that white men were in control. That's what all this is about. And what we have to do, I'm hoping that those of us who are aware of what's going on are putting our money where our mouth is, sending money to Mr. McGill, helping in other ways to help him to continue to do his work. That's the only thing we can do. We can't just sit down and wring our hands and lament what they're doing, because while we sleep, they're working.
Yeah, Shia, let me throw it to you. I know you came with some questions, so let me throw it to you.
Well, to me, this is part of the disconnect of understanding what slavery really was, how people lived. There's this romanticizing of the antebellum South and how the Great South, and we the Confederacy, and I think of Gone with the Wind, and all these things. It's just this idea that it was just a great place, and that Black people were not enslaved, but they were oh, what do they call them in one of the books in Texas? And I think
Involuntarily relocated.
yes,
Yeah.
and then I know that there was a senator that was called them something besides slaves. I mean, there's this whole notion to turn it around and make it like slavery was such a noble thing to, and people didn't live. They didn't live. They lived well. They were well taken care of. They were always well taken care of, and and this is part of that idea. And it's private property. So because it's off of Airbnb doesn't mean it's gone. It still exists. So this this is a problem because people don't understand what slavery really was. I mean, those slave quarters were luxurious, been turned into luxurious apartments. You know, Nowhere near what they once were. And we just want to erase and forget all of that and just pretend that in America everything was always great and grand for everyone. That is a problem, and I don't know how we solve that problem other than trying to continue educating. But then we get the pushback of no CRT. Anything that's Black history now is in jeopardy of being taught.
Yeah. And Joseph, let me ask you this question, because some will say, okay, if they go to your site, they see, you have, I guess, tours as well, and there's even like we see you guys dressed up. Some will say, well, is it okay for Black folks to show these cabins and to do certain things in these former slave cabins, but when somebody who owns the properties, when they list it out for rental, why should that be a problem if we can do it? What would be your response?
We're not doing it, except for when anyone can come with me and sleep in one of these places. And if you sleep in one of these places, you're not having Wi-Fi and all that's not happening for you. You bring in a sleeping bag and you're sleeping on a floor, as I will do with you in that place. But before we do that, we're sitting around a campfire and we're having a conversation similar to what we're having a conversation about right now. We got Black folks, we got white folks. We're talking about racism. We're talking about Confederate monuments. We're talking about weddings on plantations and Uncle Ben. Should they still be there? Aunt Jemima, should they still be here as an image? We talk about the death of George Floyd. That's what we do in these places. So that's my angle for doing this. But on the other side of this, you get the implicit bias in the fact that the Airbnb owners see no wrong in what they do. I think the only thing that's brought them to this place that they are is the fact that TikTok now exists. It's introduced them to a new audience, but it's always been going on. I've come across many places that use for much worse things, bathrooms. And again, my point is these are private places, private owners. They can do with these things what they want. But here's the thing. I think that if we come at it from an angle is, say, if a person coming to your place knows the history of this place and know that what they're contributing to will go into a reparations fund, then it will put that person having the desire to stay in that place, in a place where he knows that he's also contributing to a reparations fund. So
That is
that might be
that's an excellent
idea. So
that is an excellent point,
That
Mr.
again,
McGill.
all the tourism.
What do you say, Ashia? That we're not contributing to that. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
Yeah. And listen, I want to lift up a question from David Youngblood, who's watching. He says, "I'm pleased to hear, Mr. McGill, that you are documenting these places." He says, "Can you tell us the most impactful places you visited?" And obviously, we only have a couple of minutes, but he says, "Do any of these places need particular mentioning?"
Yeah. I've sat around the campfire at Monticello, the home of
Mm.
Thomas Jefferson, with the descendants of Sally Hemings and others who were enslaved there. And the conversation was about Sally Hemings, Thomas Jefferson, consensual and non-consensual, and it almost got into a fist fight amongst the descendants of Sally Hemings and others who were enslaved at that plantation. Texas, I went to Seward Plantation in Brenham, and stood on an authentic auction block and thought about people standing on auction blocks and having to bear their backs to those potential buyers, to show those potential buyers that there are no marks on his or her back, the sign of a person who's been beaten. And you don't want to buy that person to insert amongst all your docile and broken enslaved people, to give them ideas of freedom. So that was a very impactful moment. Sitting around campfires and having people reveal things about their father being a member of the KKK, or they know someone who mimics a guy who went into that church and right here in Charleston, South Carolina, took out 9 lives. They make these confessions around these campfires, and they talk about their ancestors being slave owners, and it's like they want to. It's like a confessional, but it's all a part of the process, and it's all about learning.
Yeah, Ashia, real quick, I know fabulous producer Greer had asked about whether should Black people profit from tourism of slave cabins, and what Mr. McGill described there of having folks come in. If they're paying, it should go to a reparations fund. Give us your thoughts, Ashia, on that, and any questions you might have in response to it.
I'm of two minds, because profiting off of something that was so awful, but then at the same time, if it's something to help the descendants of those people, it's so I don't know. I don't know that there's a right answer. I think there's probably a better answer, something we can do better. But I definitely think these places should not be um, tourism for a party and fun. It should be tourism that's educational, that's solemn, that respects the history and respects what happened. And so, what Mr. McGill is doing, I applaud. I appreciate. Um, yeah, this is just
Now,
it's a lot to think about.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. You can't cover this all in 20 minutes.
Barrington, I'll give you the last word on this. You're on mute, Barrington.
The young lady, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. You are so right. There were no simple answers here. It is a complex issue. It is an emotional issue, and I guess we have to just continue moving, trying to figure out the best ways, the different ways to do this.
Yeah, and again, Mr. McGill, you mentioned it, critical race theory, this idea that we shouldn't know, and you called it American history, not just Black, but Black history is American history. Quickly, your website, and where can we find more information about the Slave Dwelling Project?
slavedwellingproject.org, slavedwellingproject.org, and there you can find information about the upcoming conference next month, the 8th through the 10th. Yes, it's Stony Rebellion and the Atlantic World. Come on out, sign up for it digitally. Yes, slavedwellingproject.org. But let me leave this thought. Let's not this just know that Airbnb is the moment. Historically, it was the insurance companies insuring us as property. It was the banks holding mortgages on us as property. It was those places benefiting from the cotton that was being picked. Those northern states that were benefiting from the cotton that was being picked. It was the complicity of us as a nation, not even thinking of this as an institution, in the sense that when South Carolina seceded from the Union on December 20th of 1860, New York, for a brief moment, considered seceding also because of this financial investment in that institution. So I do want to leave with those words.
Well, we definitely appreciate it, and we can see the history and the knowledge that you have. So I can imagine those folks who visit you at the Slave Dwelling Project, the lessons that they can learn. Thanks a lot, Joseph McGill Jr., and thanks to Barrington Salmon and O'Shea Boyd, our old friend. We always appreciate her dropping in. Thanks for watching Let It Be Known. Tomorrow, join us for a special show. We have Ja Rule is joining us, as well as the sounds of blackness. Have a great afternoon, everybody, and we'll see you then.